think they need a better interface for Zoom because it's like there's functionality at the bottom left, the bottom right, the top left, the top right.
There's control surfaces everywhere.
Like, what am I supposed to look at?
But the whole reverse thing, it bothers me, because I have words behind me anyway. But I'm actually used to seeing myself in this way. And when it mirrors me, I'm like, well, that's not me.
But you can change that, right? Can you?
Yeah, I have mine set this way, but my problem is if you bring up Prezi or a variety of these apps automatically without asking, mirror your video.
I think it's just because that's how you see yourself when you look in the bathroom mirror every morning. It doesn't want to because for me, my nose goes the different direction. Because
wait, what?
Because my nose is. I think when I was a kid, I clearly got in a fight and my nose got broken. And so it's not that severe, but if I have a symmetrical nose, it's really you got pointing the other way. It's really weird for me because I see myself with the nose pointing the other way.
That's great. That's great. But I mean, that what a great story. I love that.
Whereas for those more beautiful people with symmetrical faces, which are more beautiful, that's not a problem that you have. So
I guess I don't know those people, but all right.
Yeah, those people aren't around here. Yeah. You like my cup?
Oh wow, that's special,
isn't it?
Bold.
Part of the Unicorn Squad. Yeah.
Whatever that is.
I don't know. I asked for a cup of water and my daughter gave it to me and this morning before I took her to school. So I figured I'll drink out of it.
It's a very inclusive water. Good to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And not just inclusive for all, gender preferences and identities, but also unicorns.
Yeah. That's important.
Fictional creatures as well are also included. Okay. So... Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Consultants Saying Things. I'm Chris Lockhart, joined by Phil Yanoff and Oliver Cronk, live from England. Guys, listen, you know that I like to sort of peruse around message boards and things like that. Sometimes troll, right? That sort of thing kind of excites me. It's what I live for. I was out there on the Reddit, right? On, the internet's front page out there. And so much of it can be sort of garbage, but there's this one really good group over there. It's for consulting and for consultants. And there was, I'm just scrolling through, and there was this topic that popped up, and it said, basically, I have to run this workshop. I'm a fairly junior consultant. I'm running this workshop. Never really done one of these before. What are some workshop must-haves, right? And what are some really good tips for running workshops? And I thought, this is a really interesting topic because we've all run workshops, right? Or been present for workshops that are being run or participated in workshops, and both virtual and in person and hybrid, right? And all those things. So I thought maybe we would have some insight for the cats out there that might help them run better workshops. So I mean, that's the gig here with this one, right? Oliver, you just ran one, didn't you? Didn't you just do one not that long ago on?
Yeah, so I guess I do this quite a bit. I did one as part of Architect Tomorrow in London, looking at AI and architecture. Is it augmentation or disruption? And give a bit of a talk and then sort of facilitate a roundtable discussion. But yeah, I guess these can vary, can't they? From a very small, sort of quite intimate session with a handful of people through to sort of larger industry event type things. I guess really what we're talking about here is probably the more productive, let's work on a problem, let's make some specific sort of progress on some and have some outcomes, rather than sort of, I suppose, facilitating some piece of marketing. So I guess for me, the difference between a meeting and a workshop is you're actually productively collaborating and doing something. Like maybe you're working on a document, or you're kind of moving something forward. It's probably worth defining what we mean by that workshop to start with.
Well, that's a really good point, right? Because just getting together to talk about a topic, I mean, that could just be a convention, right? That could just be a webinar, a presentation.
Yeah.
And Phil, I know you also just did one over the weekend, right? With the Stoics, right? And what style is that? Is that more presentation, or is that more like discussion group led kind of activities?
Yeah. So in my case, I'm doing a thing around a shared learning model, right? So I'm trying to get conversations started and basically have people teach each other. So it's called a communal learning kind of environment. But the idea is to get them to teach each other. So, I think to Oliver's point, I think it is really important to kind of know where you think this is headed. I mean, sometimes you are just trying to get people to collaborate better. So in that case, the content might not even be the important part. It's the structure, it's the choreography of the thing that you need to get right. But I think knowing what it is you're trying to get done, what is the telos of this thing, right? I think is useful, right? Why are we going to meet? People all the time reach out to me and say, "Hey, I would love to talk to you or pick your brain about something." I was like, "Okay, what are we going to decide here? What's happening at this event? What's the outcome we're trying to get to?"
So clear objectives, right?
Yeah.
What problem are we trying to solve for? Right. And I guess how are we going to solve it? The stuff about like, do we have flip charts? I mean, that's window dressing, right? It's what the hell are we doing here first before anything else happens? Is that it?
Feels to me like meeting. Yeah, sorry. Feels to me like meeting hygiene is important here. Like I think any decent meeting has what's known as POST. You've heard of this before, like purpose, objective, structure, and timings. I think that's super important for workshops. Everyone needs to sort of understand why we're in the room. What are we trying to look to achieve, and what are we essentially trying to leave this room aligned on, or having discussed or progressed?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, think about the worst meeting you've ever been to, and what was the first response? And it was like, "Oh, there's 2 hours I'll never get back."
Yeah, could have been an email, right?
Yeah, could have been an email, could have been nothing. I mean, it was completely pointless. And the thing is, this can be at all sorts of levels. But as a consultant, you got to think the thing we want you to be good at is facilitating a meeting towards a purpose.
Yeah, towards solving a problem, right? And generally speaking, I think when you're doing one of these, attendance in the room, the people aren't there voluntarily because they want to learn about something, right? They're there because they're stakeholders, they're other actors in whatever it is that you're trying to do, or they're clients or internal clients or whatever it might be, right? So they're not there voluntarily, right? Which I think is a little bit different than like going to a webinar or something like that, right?
Yeah. I think the other key thing is they're probably not going to be aligned. Like there's going to be the workshops that I feel the most proud of are the ones where walking into the room, I knew there were people with significant objections or differences of opinion on something, like massively on other sides of a debate. And actually, as cliches as it can be, to get up with stand up with post-its, get around a whiteboard, actually, articulate each other's points of views, not just with words, but with visuals and with stickies and what have you. I think sometimes it's that physical interaction that helps people kind of align or not. Yeah.
So that sort of begs a question, right? Which is, why are you having the thing to begin with, which we touched on, right? But it's in what you just described is, the reason we're getting together in person here today, folks, is because we don't have alignment, right? So this couldn't have been an email. This couldn't have been a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, right? We needed to get in and hash this out. Are there other good reasons to get together? Because we can collaborate virtually now. Like do we have to get in a room with flip charts and meet everyone and learn, Phil's favorite ice cream, so I know something about it? Like, do we have to do that anymore? What is your favorite ice cream? Is it butter pecan? It is butter pecan, isn't it?
Rocky Road. It's the story of my life. It's a metaphor. But the thing is, so I have this all the time. You get feedback from meetings and so forth, and people think, and they'll say things like, "Well, I don't understand. I mean, I wish we'd gotten to the meat of this quicker." And what they don't understand is that a lot of that stuff you did at the beginning was actually so that you could open up a conversation and have the challenging conversation that you're going to have at some point. I need everybody to figure out it's okay to let's have this conversation, and everyone to agree on what I basically call, in my world, we call this an upfront contract. But what's the contract for why we were here? What is the thing that we're going to have some agreement on about why we're here and what we're going to try to get done today? And we have other things that go in that contract, right? How are we going to disagree with each other? How are we going to express that? Or, positive, unconditional positive regard is an example of a thing that we usually set as a tenant for the room, right?
Do you write that stuff out as part of the agenda? Is that out there? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I either talk all the way through it, or it's just right here. It says, "Look, this is how we're going to get started on this today, and these are the things. These are the rules that we're going to use for this room. Are we okay with that?"
You raise a really good point around different personality styles as well. Like some people are very analytical, right? They will be convinced by data and spreadsheets and so on. Others are far more creative and visual, and others are far more directive. Like, let's just make this happen. And I think often the workshops that kind of get the different stakeholders who have those different sort of worldviews, particularly you're operating at that C-level, your CFO is typically going to be highly analytical. Your CEO is often going to be highly driven. Your chief marketing officer in the room, they're going to be more creative. I'm making generalizations and stereotypes here, galore, I know, but to make a point, which is, some people want to do the small talk at the beginning. Some people want to kind of do that because that's what kind of gets them, in the right place to have the difficult conversation. Other people will want to get straight into it. It's kind of balancing, isn't it? I think the needs of the different sort of cats in the room.
What if, so that's an interesting point, Oliver. Like, so if you're in the office building back when we all worked in office buildings, right? And you have to have this working session and this workshop in order to get through sort of, some problem area that needs to be resolved. Everyone may know each other or probably knows each other or knows of each other, or it's like, oh, that guy, he's a real, whatever. Don't use his trigger word, right? Whatever it might be, right? But in the other case where people don't know each other at all, right, or are coming from different regions, as an example, right? They're all the same company, but they're coming from different offices or something like that. It's. I think, Phil, at the beginning, you said something about like psychological comfort, right? So a must-have is an agenda. Got it, right? But we also need to establish that psychological ability to have the conversation. And it seems like that would be different if people knew each other. In the corporate example, Oliver, that you gave, some of those people are probably afraid of the CMO or the whatever it is, right? The CFO, like, oh, well, I'm not really going to say what I really think in this workshop because, my boss's boss is here. But in the other example, Phil, right, you're talking about folks that are maybe coming together for a common purpose that may not know each other. And so you've right. got to establish, that comfort level, right?
Yeah. I mean, you want to engage them and have them engage each other and make it clear that it's okay to have a conversation, right? So I think you got to figure out how you're going to do that. But that's kind of reading the room in advance. And by the way, you pointed out something really good there, Chris, which is, there was a time when we were all in the office together. And so we'd already did the bonding and rapport step before we ever walked into the room. Now, some of that and much of that is lost. You may have team members that have never sat down in a room with each other before. And so you have to think about, how am I going to address that? Because I can't have a good conversation if Chris doesn't feel comfortable expressing his concerns in front of Oliver because Oliver's got a reputation, or the vice versa. It doesn't matter. But if we can't establish that ahead of time about what the conversation is going to be like. So I think you want, part of your process at the beginning, and this doesn't need to be long, and this doesn't mean there's going to be a ropes course in every meeting, but it means that there's going to be some piece of this where we say, all right, let's make sure we get everybody engaged here.
So for that, right? Does the venue matter? I think, Phil, you've expressed before you don't really like hybrid meetings, right? But like right. When you're in person, right? I mean, I know things. We've probably all been in a working session, a workshop where the acoustics are terrible, right? I've been in quarterly meetings where someone's speaking on a microphone and you can see them on the camera, but nobody on the internet can hear them through, it's just like,
it's terrible.
Or vice versa. Yeah. No one in the room can hear them, but everyone on virtual can hear them. Right. So does the venue matter, or the style, I guess, matter?
Well, let me just ask you this, Chris. Have you ever gone in to do one of these corporate, a corporate workshop, right? You want the people to interact with each other, and done it in theater style seating?
No.
Never. Why?
Never. Well, because I want them sitting across the table from each other.
You want their faces pointed at each other so that they engage each other in conversation, right? So I think that matters, whether it's a U shape or an O shape or a conference room table or something like that. So conversational choreography absolutely matters.
Write that down if you're listening. Conversational choreography. I like that.
Yeah,
that's
good. How many people are involved in the dance, and how are they facing each other? I think it matters a lot.
Think about the unique position a consultant is often in. There is often politics, or to your point you were just talking about earlier, Phil, some people won't want to say certain things to other people in the room. A good consultant can cut through all that, because there isn't that baggage there in most cases, unless there's an ongoing kind of engagement happening. So I think that's where you can kind of play that trump card of being like Switzerland, being a sort of neutral mediator, if you like. I've often had to do that, where you've got a conflict between scope and quality and cost or whatever, and you've got different stakeholders fighting for the different sort of angles. Coming into the room as the consultant, kind of acting as that sort of mediator, I think is the unique value I think the consultant can bring. Why use a consultant? Well, because that's, in addition to having this sort of skill set of facilitation, you also have this sort of neutral position, I think, in many cases that helps you kind of do that facilitation.
I think you're right. And I think that's probably, in a lot of cases why, the workshop is being conducted by an outside party, right? I mean, you can ask the tough questions, which sort of, one of the things that, I've seen done before is sort of pre-reads or pre-polls or something like, we're talking about this, blah, blah, what is your experience with onboarding new employees in the process and whatever, so that you've got a sense of sort of where everyone's head's at. And, the chief people officer thinks everything's great and everyone else thinks it's crap. Well, now you can sort of ask tougher questions or directional questions to open up the dialogue, right? Whereas the people in the room are never going to challenge the chief human resources person, right, on the onboarding process. I don't know. I just made that up. There is
it's good
I don't have a client with an onboarding process problem. So
right, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the thing is, you as the consultant have the opportunity to facilitate conversations that would not occur otherwise. You can break old loops. You can, you talked about cutting through it, but I think the idea is you can make a connection that people might not make otherwise, because you get to play the fool, right? As the consultant, you get to go and just ask questions, right? Yeah. And that my job, your job as a consultant, for example, is not to convince somebody of a thing, but to make them uncertain of their position, just to make sure that they've considered it thoughtfully. Is this in fact true? And how committed am I to this position? And if you ask the right questions, you can then have these people asking these questions of each other in a way that can grant insight. And that's what you're trying to get to. You're trying to get to connection and insight.
Right. And so facilitating something like that is more than just being the MC, right? You're not just up there saying the next agenda item, coffee will be at 9:15, right? It's not that.
Restrooms are down the hall.
Restrooms are not asking good questions, right?
Comes back to that difference between a meeting and a workshop. Like you have a chairperson, chairing a regular meeting. Right. I think you have a facilitator for a workshop, and it's a two-way process. It's seeding the situation enough to get people talking, and then knowing when to shut up and allow the discussion that needs to happen. The other thing I would say I've often struggled with, and I don't know if it's just me because I'm not always a super detailed person, is facilitating that conversation and then having someone record. I think that's an important thing as a consultant, like bringing in a wing person.
I want to take notes. Find an analyst or an associate to take notes.
Yeah, as cliched as it is to bring in the sort of junior, and then at the end it's like, right, what the hell was that then? Because that was not what was discussed. But yeah, I think having the two, for me, a minimum, if you're running a significant workshop, having a facilitator and having a scribe is really important.
Well, I mean, I think there's table stakes there, right? Which is, does the tech in the room work, right? Does the audio work in the room wherever you are? Does the Wi-Fi work? Does the whatever, right? Do you have the flip charts or the sticky notes or whatever if you need those things, right? But then there's the other thing, right? Which is, how useful would it be? Maybe not every context, but someone is assiduously taking notes and structuring the content. Maybe it's, Claude or Bard or somebody eventually sort of recording and capturing.
Otter.
Yeah. Right. And then within the meeting at the end, it's like, okay, great. Thank you for attending this 3-day thing. Great stuff. Here's what we talked about. And you can kind of give them a replay, not blow by blow, but you can give them a bit of a summary of like, this is what we said, because how many workshops have you come out of and like 3 days later, minutes go out. It's like, here's what we all talked about. And you look at it, it's like, I don't see any of my stuff that I contributed in there. Right.
One of the best examples I've seen of this is there was like an illustrator that was hired for one of the it was a big cross-industry workshop when I was working in Big Four. And they literally for like 2-3 days were there doodling this really big like wall in the facilitation center, which, the Big Four often have these sort of funky spaces, don't they, for having, these sorts of, conversations. And by the end of the sessions, we have this amazing kind of piece of artwork, a brainstorm, very nicely whiteboarded brainstorm of the core concepts of the things that have been linked together, the kind of
cloud mapping. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was incredible because then everyone had something. Like you go, oh yeah, I can see you representing my input there, and other people kind of see how that picture kind of evolves. So I think again, that's a really high level workshop for me. Is you have that sort of illustrator in the room doing that sort of
thing. As the person or part of the team running the workshop, how do you get that collaboration from the folks in the room? How do you get so that at the end of it, everyone feels like, yeah, my voice was heard. My thought was written on the doodle on the wall, or whatever. My comment was captured in the notes, and I can see my contribution. I feel like I was part of it. How do you collaborate, right? Because there's different ways of doing it. Everyone, like you mentioned, Phil, like lecture style, right? Like everyone in the room, and here's what I'm going to tell you for the next 6 hours, between bio breaks. And then there's like the breakout session style. There's the, a breakout session, but I'm going to seed one of my team in there to sort of facilitate at the lower level. And then everyone comes back and reports, right? There's all those kinds of different ways. What are some ways to sort of get folks to feel like they've been part of that process?
I think Phil touched on some of this at the beginning, which was that kind of almost rules of engagement. Like, this is how it's going to be. And one of the things I quite like is it's kind of a football or soccer for you two thing where, and I don't know if they're the same in American football, the kind of yellow and red card sort of sports analogy where, everyone has the ability to play to use a yellow card or a red card. And it's a silly example of some of the sort of rules of engagement, I suppose, which is perhaps yellow card is where someone is not giving you the opportunity to kind of comment, or there's a topic that's a bit taboo. And a red card might be, no, the situation, this discussion has become uncomfortable to the point about psychological safety earlier. So having like a mechanism that you can easily, and I know that there was one meeting where we had this button in the middle of the table, like someone is using terminology that I do not understand, because it was across, there was technologists in the room, there was business people in the room. So there was this, this tech, I think it was, technology bullshit or whatever button in the middle of the room, which someone could hear, and it became a bit of a joke. It was a bit lighthearted, but so the kind of yellow card, red card, something in the room, physical, that lets people say, hey, we need to time out. Someone needs this explained, or this isn't, this is getting too heated. We need to break this down. Right. I think these sorts of things come with experience, like knowing your audience, knowing what they will kind of tolerate, and when to use that smaller breakout group, when to turn to people quietly writing down on Post-it notes. Because that's the other thing for me the other day was I realized a great style that one of my colleagues was using was, let's introduce the session and then let's let everyone have 5 minutes of quiet time writing down their thoughts and starting there before we just allow the most dominant voices in the room just to kind of take over the discussion. Let's let everyone have that opportunity to kind of just capture what's in their mind relating to this thing, and then we can work through those points and look for early areas of alignment or disagreement from those things that were captured. So I think it comes from having the experience of running these things, I think.
Well, I've seen you do breakout sessions before in teams, or Zoom or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to do on Zoom, but the thing is, it's a real world analogy as well. So if you took, for example, what Oliver just said, for example, if you took that and said, look, I want you to come up with your ideas, that's kind of you brainstorming first, then I think that, depending on who you are working with, it might be the next step in a workshop like that might be to put people in small groups to share these ideas, and either they're going to prioritize them or they're going to categorize them or something like that. But it's the idea that you can have them share them in small groups. And that way they can kind of get a sense of what other people are thinking in this space as well. And then take the groups and then have the groups report out, and basically then bring all this together and synthesize something. I'm just really a fan of this group learning model, particularly for solving cultural problems, for solving large organization issues where we don't really understand why this isn't doing, or we don't understand what the next step is. Let's figure out what the problems are or what the challenges are to implementing something new here, and let's have a conversation about that. But I think if we start, Oliver just said it perfectly, right? If you start at the beginning just saying, let's just blurt this out, someone hopefully whose thinking is good, but it doesn't matter, their speaking is good, right? And so they will go out and they can easily dominate a conversation. Unless you have a really good, strong facilitator, they can easily dominate a conversation, and they might even be right. Occasionally they are, maybe frequently even, it doesn't matter. But the fact is, there are all these other things that just, once I got the answer, I don't even bother to look for all the other stuff that might have been part of this.
So like in that example that you used, right, of like, I don't know, dealing with cultural problems or whatever it might be, like, how do you ensure as the facilitator that you've got the right mix, or maybe not the right mix, but a mix of perspective and, all of the DEI type stuff, right? So how do you make sure that you got the right people in those breakout sessions? Because you don't want groupthink, right? It's like, I'm dealing with an accounting problem, so I put all the accountants in one group. They're going to come back with an answer that's accounting jargon, right? It's
you definitely don't want to do that, right? You definitely
could you imagine that work at that breakout session, like 5 accountants in a room? I mean, you'd want to kill yourself, wouldn't you? I'm sorry. I'm sure there's lovely account. My wife was an accountant. Anyway, but the point is, back to the point.
Yeah, but no, right. So in that, shaking that up, right, and not allowing groups that normally get together to collaborate because you want new ideas. And, you can say this up front, right? Guess what? I'm going to put you with people you don't normally get to talk to. And this is, and by the way, in this beginning phase, we are leaning more towards exploration than exploitation, right? We're not trying to get to the very best at the beginning. We're trying to figure out what are all the possibilities. So let's put our mindset in that first and be open to a bunch of ideas from other people. And if you are ready for that, let's go grab this group, your group of 3 or 5 or whatever it is, and put some ideas and start writing them on Post-it notes. And I want you to put them on a grid like this. And then we're going to come back and talk about it. It's kind of a design thinking here. Here's the deal is, we need lots of ideas typically to solve complicated problems. We don't need an idea. And then, because then we're just going to run it to the end and see if it worked or not. That's not really solving the problem usefully.
You raise a really good point there, Phil, about how people tend to leap to solutioning.
Yeah.
Depending on who you have in the room. But yeah, often you get the dopamine high, don't you, of solving the problem. And so everyone likes that.
And I'm really smart, Oliver. So, people need my valuable opinion, right?
Yeah. I have to. They won't know how to solve this if I don't say the thing, right?
Right. I mean, but isn't it kind of cool? I mean, as a consultant, as a facilitator, to realize that isn't your role, but it's your role at the end of the day is to ask the good questions so that someone in the room will blurt out the right answer.
And you've touched on another really important point there, which is recognizing when you aren't the right person to facilitate. That actually you need to participate. And I think this is a hard lesson that I think to start with my career, I wasn't a great facilitator because I did way too much talking. So I was like an SME that you'd bring in and say, Oliver, what's the deal with security for this platform, whatever. And then over time, I realized that, it's about, using your ears more than speaking and asking, to your point, the right questions and getting people to come out of their shell sometimes and say, hey, you've been quiet on this one. What's your opinion on this one, Chris? Why aren't you, you're normally telling us everything about what you had for dinner last week and you're quiet today. So what's going on with you?
Yeah. So Oliver, you were one of those tech nerds that came in and you just thought we were all idiots in the room. Is that what it
was? It was the early days of the internet. I'll use that.
That was Tuesday.
No one really knew what was going on.
Yeah. No, you don't use FTP for that. You use Gopher for that. God, what a bunch of morons in this room.
I like the Napoleon Dynamite inflection you put in there.
You're welcome. Yeah. So I had a train of thought there for a second. Now it's completely gone. But no, so like along this idea, right, of getting people to engage with each other. You're not there to pontificate, right? You're there to, as Phil said, ask the right question, ask good questions, but get them talking to each other, right? Isn't that one of the objectives of a good working session? Is if, workshop is if the folks are speaking to each other rather than being spoken to, kind of thing.
Yes, but I think it depends on the objective of the session, right? You have to be careful not for something to become a talking shop. So for me, I think the workshop is about coming out with some concrete kind of, like I said at the beginning, like actions or outcomes. And there's a danger that sometimes you can just have a debate and not have a consensus at the end. So I think the facilitator also needs to navigate and challenge people's sort of views. So it's not just about asking the right questions. It's about going, is that really right? Or, kind of steering things a little bit towards a desired outcome. So I think that the workshop for me, the big difference is you almost need to pre-plan what the steps that you you won't necessarily survive contact with the meeting, with the actual reality, but you at least have a rough sketch, an idea of, right, we're going to start by getting people to kind of brain dump. We're going to do this. We're going to break off. We're going to do the other, with the objective that we will end up with a refined list of 5 outcomes or 6, steps on the plan, or whatever the outcome is. But it's working backwards, I think, from that goal and going, right, knowing who's in the room, what's the sort of style that's going to work for that, and when should we break out? When should we stay as a group? I think there's a little bit of pre-planning. Whereas at meetings, I think you can rock up, you can chair a meeting, you can kind of give people airtime, and ensure everyone has a chance to talk about something. But was that really a workshop? No, it was a talking shop, really. So that's the key difference for me is what are those kind of concrete outcomes that you're trying to take away from the session?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's probably even more important to consider those things in the case where someone is paying for the workshop, right? I've paid $100 or whatever to attend this workshop. I need to get something out of it. I need to go home with something. This isn't an airing of the grievances, right? This is like, I need to get something out of this. I think in the cases like in the corporate environment where you're having a 2-day offsite workshop to solve a problem with migrating your data center wherever, right? Whatever it might be, right? Like that's different because now you could be super highly structured, right? Because we have to worry about the network and the moving vans and the servers and the whatever, right? So I think you're absolutely right. It's going in, knowing what you need to do, and then articulating a plan to get there, right? And those very tactical things. Yeah, interesting.
And you will have to adjust on the fly. The things that you think might work may well need some different approaches. But go on, Phil. Sorry, I jumped in.
No, I think that's all true. And the thing is, in a workshop, Chris kind of brought up a different kind of workshop, right? So I might be in a workshop where I paid individually to accomplish something, but then I had my own individual goals. I think as a consultant, it's frequently you're in a workshop and the company or a team or something is trying, there's some organization trying to achieve something. And in that case, I think having some conversation with the key stakeholder at the beginning of like, why are we here? Look, I know you're busy people and this is expensive to bring people underneath one roof for a while to have, you're taking away from other activities that you also identified as important. And you're doing that so that they can do what happens in this, not just what is the conversation, but what are we aiming to do? And it could be as simple as, I want this team to work better together. They don't have alignment in their goals. I mean, it might be as simple as that. But
so there is a ropes course. So that's what you're saying. I
don't know if ropes. That's not my thing, but it could be somebody's thing. Right. But it could be some. Yeah, that's it.
So for the European ropes, is that an American thing?
So frequently in the type of thing that Phil just described, right? You will have a corporate event where everyone from the accounting and finance team is going to go out with the people from the planning team and they never talk to each other and they hate each other. But as the leader, I really want to get them out there. And so they'll go out to some place somewhere that has, rope things in the woods where you have to the classic problems. I have to get everyone across this river using a toothpick.
Team building exercise type thing.
Building exercise. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I just thank you. I could have just said team building exercise.
It's fine. It's cool.
Yeah. Amateur.
You've told me some new lingo.
Yeah. Yeah. But in that, so the thing is, it could be that, but I think having some idea of what it might be at the beginning is and part of it could be, it's these people are scrapping all the time and they're not, if they're not collaborating, they're fighting, right? How can I get that? What can we do? Let's figure out what those underlying things are. Let's start having those conversations. So it might be as simple as that, or it might be like what Chris had said, I got to move a data center, and I specifically have to figure out what this is going to look like. So let's figure out how to solve that problem.
So Phil, I think it's more the human things that require the in-person workshop. Like we need to restructure, or we've just merged with this other business. We now need to work out what does the interim org structure maybe look like, and what does the target one look like. It's those sorts of conversations. I think the work in person. I think the data center migration, it's not as human unless people are going to lose jobs because you're getting rid of certain tasks. I feel that is the sort of thing you could run remote. Whereas for me, the ones that have always been difficult have been like the org design type workshops, right? We know, historically we've had 3 teams doing this stuff. We now want to go down to 2, or like I say, we've just acquired this company, or we're divesting this unit. How do we restructure? It's the human stuff, shall I say?
What should this team do now versus this team? What does the process look like? What are the points of intersection? What does the interaction model look like?
Exactly.
How do people work together? Right.
That's the most valuable type of workshop in person, I think. Anyway, is that this is going to have some people impact. So let's get together as people, look each other in the eye, and agree a way forward that's sensible.
Yeah. So let me just say to Chris's original question, the Reddit questioner, their query is, and they said, I want to do this hybrid, and my first advice is don't. And part of the reason I say that if you can avoid this at all, to Oliver's point, and to wrap this conversation in something, is that if you want people to have a valuable conversation where they're all contributing, they need to be on equal footing. So that is equal footing in the room or on the Zoom. It would be better for them to all be on Zoom than it would be to have half of them in space and half of them not. Yeah. But it's the same kind of thing to kind of we talked about a comfortable environment. I think Chris brought up, is the tech right? Is the room right? Et cetera. So that means, for example, I've been in these where, we have 12 seats around a conference table, and then we have stuff around the outside. And I'm going to tell you, it's a 2-class system if I ever saw it. It's super obvious who is in and who is out in that. And if you want everyone to feel like they're in, you need to figure out how to structure that room so that everyone feels like they're in the conversation.
That was pretty good. That was your final thought on that, to answer the Redditor's question?
I wanted to answer that Reddit question because, having run a bunch of these, in fact, having attempted to work with some other people who are doing hybrid meetings, I think it can be done. It's really expensive to get the tech of that right. And, very few people have, the telepresence capabilities and all that kind of stuff to make that work. If you've got that, you might be able to make that work. But for most people, you can't.
Yeah. I mean, sort of my encompassing thought on this, right? And what the thread was on Reddit is must-haves. There are some table stakes, right? As you said, make sure the audio is good or whatever, right? Yeah. But a must-have, I think, is the clear objective of why are we here? Because if you were to take, 50 people and calculate what that salary is for 3 days at a workshop, that's a significant investment. So what are we getting out of it? Right? What is the outcome? What is the value that is going to come out of this thing? If it's just people getting aligned, maybe there's a better way to do that. If it is to solve a particular problem, and it'll work better if we're in person to solve that problem. Incidentally, one of the ones that I did was a data center migration, right? And we did it in person. in your neck of the woods, actually, Oliver. And that worked because it was like sticky notes on the wall. No, this has to go before this, right? So it was very interactive, which probably wouldn't have worked quite as well in virtually. But yeah, I think it's all of that, right? Because if you don't have that, what are we doing here? What are we trying to get out of this? The rest of it, people are going to come away with different feelings of what the outcome was, right? And they're not going to be aligned. You're going to cause misalignment coming out of the workshop. Oliver, you got some final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of must-haves, I think it's that preparation. Like if you go into this thing trying to wing it because you're just really busy and you've got loads of projects going on, whatever, don't expect to have a particularly, well, if you're lucky, it'll be okay and you'll get away with it. But I think I'm always nervous if you don't have like a rough plan of how this stuff's going to go, particularly if it's more than a couple of hours. If it's a half-day, multi-day thing, you need to have a rough idea of how you're planning to get the best out of the people in that room to get to get to the outcomes that you were just talking about, Chris.
Not unlike an episode of a podcast, right? Where it should be
no comment.
A good strong beginning, a good strong end, and a peak experience somewhere in the middle. That's what we're here for.
That's right. Exactly. All right, guys. Listen, thank you. We miss Wendy. She's busy doing other important things, and
she's probably doing a workshop.
Exactly. Yeah. Love an opportunity to talk to her about it sometime. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Phil. Thank you, Oliver. I'm Chris Lockhart, everybody. We'll see you next time. But don't forget to like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. And
we need you to like us.
Follow us on all the socials. Right. All right. Talk to you guys next time.